Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Giselle Gayette. I'm the Youth Services Librarian here at the Manchester Community Library. We're so honored and pleased to have Mr. Nicholson and the debate team from Burr & Burton Academy here to offer this wonderful program today. Thank you to Paige Vignola for being instrumental in setting this up, and thank you, Mr. Nicholson. Without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Nicholson.
Thanks, Giselle. My name is Pete Nicholson, and I am the coach of the Burr & Burton Debate Team. And we are proud and pleased to host our first public debate event here at the Manchester Library. We hope this is the first of many of these debates that will be open to the public and allow us to talk about current events, philosophical issues, and bring debate, open to a lot of people who might be interested in many points of view. Today we have 3 debates scheduled. Our first debate is a philosophical question: was mathematics discovered or invented? Our second debate addresses a very serious current events issue: should NATO increase its military response to Russian aggression in Ukraine? And our third round today is an improvisational debate activity open to anyone here who wishes to try their hand at debate. So an impromptu debate round just for fun will end it. So our format today will include opening speeches and then question and answer, where the debaters will respond to questions from anyone in the room. So that includes audience members, opponents, or other debaters. During the question and answer, all debaters will speak from the podium, where they should speak for about 30 seconds. If a member of the pro team speaks, then the con team would have the opportunity to speak next, and if all debaters would have a chance to speak, respond to any question. After all debaters had that chance, we would move on to the next question. Question and answer period run about 10 minutes, depending on how lively it runs and how good the questions are, and we will end with a short, approximate 2-minute closing speech that will end the debate. Today's debate rounds are not competitions. These students have participated in competitions called public forum debate at the state level and in the state championship tournament. Today's round will not have to end with a winner, but rather everyone will be a winner when we learn to think with multiple perspectives. That's correct, Tom. Our first round, so let's get started. Our first round today is again the question of mathematics. Was it invented or discovered? On my right is Shay Smithwick, who will be arguing that mathematics was discovered. On the left, we have Carter Teitelbaum, Ben Kirkpatrick, and they will argue mathematics is invented. We're going to hear first from the team that argues invented, then discovered, we'll hear, and then the question and answer. Thank you.
Opponent ready?
Ready.
Partner ready? Not ready. My partner and I strongly negate the resolution that math was discovered and not invented. The definition of mathematics, according to Merriam-Webster, is, quote, the science of numbers and their operations, interrelations, combinations, generalizations, and abstractions, and of space configurations and their structure, measurement, transformations, and generalizations. To follow, the definition of invented is to produce something such as a useful device or process for the first time through the use of imagination or of ingenious thinking and experiment. Also from Merriam-Webster. Our primary contention, negating the resolution, is the following. Math was invented as a product of human intelligence and is unable to exist outside of the human mind. According to Max Tegmark, a Swedish-American physicist in Scientific American, on quote, yes, math exists in nature. 2 + 2 = 4, no matter your ability to understand the concept. However, to express this as an equation and to create means to teach this to others means we have invented the principles to describe how our lives are governed. Unquote. The mathematical entities, relations, and equations used in math and science were developed for a specific application. Newton, for instance, formulated the branch of mathematics known as calculus because he needed this tool for capturing motion and change, breaking them up into tiny frame-by-frame sequences. Our position is known as the non-Platonist view, and that is essentially the opinion that math is suited to the human mind. To further back up our position on this matter, we have another quote worth mentioning from Derek Abbott, a physicist and electronic engineer. Unquote. The non-Platonist view is that, first of all, mathematical models are approximations of reality. Second, our models fail. They go through a process of revision, and we invent new mathematics as needed. Analytical mathematical expressions are a product of the human mind, tailored for the mind. Derek Abbott also stated that, quote, math is a human construct. The only reason mathematics is admirably suited to describing the physical world is that we invented it to do just that. It is a product of the human mind, and we make mathematics up as we go along to suit our purposes. If the universe disappeared, there would be no mathematics, in the same way that there would be no football, tennis, chess, or any other set of rules with relational structures that we've contrived. Mathematics is not discovered, it is invented. This is the non-Platonist position, end quote. This evidence continues to prove that mathematics was invented and not discovered, as mathematics is not apparent in nature, but is rather a tool used in dissecting the properties of the universe and the world around us. When the first early humans sought to prove why 2 + 2 = 4, we sought to simplify the natural world into principles that we could understand and teach to others. We invented new ways of expressing this world, and thus we invented math. As a result of this evidence, my partner and I strongly negate the resolution that math was discovered and not invented. Thank you for your time. Thanks, sir.
Okay, all right. Let's move this out of the way. Okay. Opponents ready? Audience ready? All right, my time begins now. Good afternoon. I strongly affirm the resolution that math was discovered, not invented. Firstly, a definition. The Oxford Dictionary defines it discovered as to find something or someone unexpectedly or in the course of a search. This is a mathematician solving and discovering a new problem in the world of math. I would now like to compare mathematics to time. Since the beginning of the world, time has affected the way humans and animals act, from sleep to meals. As a species, we discovered how to use and be able to tell time. Ancient civilizations would spear a stick on the ground, and the shadow by the sun would help them know what stage of the day it was. Later, we invented clocks, digital and analog. But time was always there. My point is that math has been around us forever. Cavemen didn't know what was happening between a rock and stick when they created fire. We discovered friction later, but it was still affecting their lives. Or how about dividing berries and meat amongst the other cavemen? The element of fractions was not known by any of these prehistoric beings, but they were using math, and it was affecting them. The earliest form of fractions in writing, or symbols rather, can be traced back to the ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamians, long after the cavemen were dividing up food. Fractions and countless other forms of more advanced math, such as algebra, geometry, calculus, and trigonometry, have existed for eons. Dr. Nicole Preiser believes math was discovered, and that there are more mathematical things for us to discover as well. Mathematics is a universal language. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI for short, tries to communicate and send messages to aliens using mostly dense, technical jargon and mathematical formulas. Math is a universal language and a principle we're discovering because it has existed, and it may be used by other life forms on other planets. Scientists and mathematicians pick equations to describe already existing relationships. They do not choose analytical methods arbitrarily, but rather on the basis of how well they predict the results of their experiments. In May of 2013, mathematician Yiteng Zhang introduced a study of prime numbers, which are numbers that aren't divisible by any other number smaller than 1. Large, except 1. Zhang of the University of New Hampshire showed for the first time that even though prime numbers get increasingly rare as you go further along the number line, you will never stop finding pairs of primes within 70 million. Further research and more mathematicians proved and dropped the colossal 70 million to a gap between primes of 246. This is further proof that math has existed and could have been discovered and solved before now by anyone. It wasn't invented. We had discovered it. Let's look at one more element, invention from the past. Thomas Alva Edison invented the light bulb in 1879. He harnessed electricity to do so. Electricity had existed for billions of years before Edison ever decided to create the light bulb. It was all around us in storms and had general attraction to water and metal materials and elements. Math is like electricity. It cannot be invented because it was always there. As a species, we can and we have used math to invent more complex things, just like Edison and the electricity and the light bulb. In conclusion, it's clear that math has been around us forever. It is the job of mathematicians and scientists to discover new forms of math. The SETI is a group of scientists using mathematical equations so complex that you and I wouldn't be able to understand it. Their hopes are to communicate with extraterrestrials because it's a universal language that exists, and we discovered, not an invention of mankind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, debaters. We are now going into our question and answer portion of the debate.
So the question was, is the tiger dividing up food, would we consider that to be math? Is that, okay. I would say so, yes. The tiger isn't exactly understanding, the fractions or like the division that it's doing by dividing up this food, but because it's such a simple, survival necessity for the tiger and like primal humans, I would say that, math is like a universal thing that everyone can connect to, even the tiger dividing up this food, because, on its simplest level, this is something that we all do. And we see it more complexly, like when we're trying to communicate to extraterrestrials, we're using more complex equations. But I would say that the tiger dividing up food is this like mathematical language at its simplest form. Yes.
Perfect. And Carter, you want to respond? Yes. Again, question and answer, about 30 seconds for you debaters for each person.
I would have to say that the tiger dividing food for his family would be mathematics, because under the definition of invented, it does not have to be a human inventing these new ways. The tiger can be inventing the ways to divide the food for his family, thus making the math that he's using invented. My partner in his speech had a quote from Max Tegmark, and it states that, yes, math exists in nature. 2 + 2 = 4, no matter your ability to understand the concept. But to express this as an equation and to create means to teach this to others means that we have invented the principles to describe how our lives are governed.
I just had a question for, what was your name? The one that just spoke?
Carter.
Carter. Isn't it also, wouldn't it also be possible though for a tiger to teach the other tiger to divide the food? Therefore, could it be outside of human?
Yes, I'm saying that even though it's not a human, it's still inventing the ways of math. Does this answer your question?
I would like to actually add on to this. No, you can stay there. You can stay there. I'll ask you something. Oh, you want me to come up here as well? Okay. So my question is, the tiger's really discovering this method, not inventing. Because how can they be inventing this? Because it is around, it's existing in nature. They're just discovering this way to find this food. It's not an invention of them. They're discovering how to divide up the food, and that's the math.
Well, so he got a fresh kill. He needs to divide it up. He needs to figure out how to divide it up equally. He invented the way that he divided up. To express this as a means of like teaching, he has to invent it.
But I'm saying no. No, absolutely not. Because let's say that these meat parts that he's dividing up, he needs to divide them up, right? They're existing around him. This mathematical concept of dividing this up exists around him. Other species are doing it as well. I bet prehistoric humans were dividing up the meat, or maybe some other birds were dividing up some sort of grasses. So I would say that this tiger isn't inventing it. He's discovering it for himself and maybe for his species, but it's a discovery, not an invention for a species.
I would have to argue that, it's clearly invented because he is teaching this to other tigers, as you've stated. The only way for him to express this he'd have to invent it. If the concept of dividing the meat was around, he would have to figure out a way to express this, and that would be invention.
Let's stop there on this exchange.
It sounds to me like you're using the word invent as a synonym for understand. Can you clarify the distinction between those two terms?
Right, so we want a definition of invention as clarified compared to understand. And could you just repeat that question?
Right. So you want the difference in definition between understand, and invent. So, as stated in our speech, we defined invented as to produce something, such as a useful device or process, for the first time through the use of imagination or of ingenious thinking and experiment. Now, I think the difference here is that this tiger would be he would be demonstrating this concept that he invented. He would have to invent this concept in order to, show other members of his species, this concept. So I would have to say the difference between invention and understanding is that invention is is through the process of trial and error, through the process of trial and error, through the process of trial and error, I would say that that is what invention is. Understanding a concept implies that it was already invented or discovered. But in this case, it would have to be invented in order for the tiger to, demonstrate that concept to the other members of his species.
I would actually like to add on to this because the way you're using invention, it's like this tiger is figuring something out, which I think is more, you're saying he's understanding it, because to understand is, to perceive something or to figure it out, which is what the tiger is doing with the meat, right? By dividing it up, he's perceiving and understanding how to do it, right? Would you agree? A yes or a no, please.
I would say no, because he has to, in order to show, or we're assuming he's showing this.
Well, if he's understanding it, he's discovering it. Which, because he is discovering it, because the math is around him, he's discovering it. And I think he can show it. Even if he has discovered it, I still think he can teach it to the other tigers, which I think that's just an invalid, really answer to the invention thing here. Because if it's discovered, he can still teach it to the other animals as well. So, thank you.
So the conversation began with the fact that these ideas are mutually exclusive, invention and versus discover. But in fact, we've had a discussion here about what was essentially technology, even the way you're expressing this communication, language is technology. So in the overarching idea of technology, is it possible, I'm asking both panels, that in fact, that when we speak of what we're talking about, there's a sort of a constant interchange between invention and discovery to reach what we call technology. And so there's really no way to somatically isolate invention or discovery as some sort of idea. These a priori categories are false from the beginning.
Go ahead. See if you can repeat that question. Basically, in these valid terms.
Right. So you're basically stating that there's a sort of gray area between invention and discovery, correct?
Yeah, I'd say actually you need the word technology to really sort of unite even what you're talking about. You're speaking about almost like an arm and a leg without talking about body.
Right.
That's the kind of image I would sort of give.
Now, I see what you're saying, and personally, I'm pretty sure we all agree that there is definitely some overlap, but for the purpose of this debate, it's very important that we stay on one side. Very rarely are we able to, compromise. So personally, I agree with you, but for the purposes of this debate, we are required to stay on one side, unfortunately.
I would love to answer your question. So I'd like to return back to my old friend Thomas Alva Edison for this, okay? So much like electricity, math has existed around us for eons and billions of years. He's harnessing this electricity, which has been discovered over the course of time, to invent the light bulb. So I think that math can be discovered, but then used to invent greater technology, greater rockets, and even develop these discovered equations or just like mathematical concepts as well.
So we're going to end the question and answer part right there, which was, I thought, well handled by all the debaters. Well done. So we're going to end this round by giving each team one more chance to speak. So about 2 minutes, we'll call this like closing words after having heard the questions. and we'll end the round after that. So we'll first start with Corey.
A real?
Yeah, good idea. We're going to give the debaters 1 minute chance to talk and prepare, and then we'll hear their closing words. 1 minute starts now.
My partner and I continue to negate the resolve that math was discovered and not invented. Our opponents have provided a few contentions, all of which they have failed to convince us on. First being that math is universal, which is clearly false, because if the universe had disappeared, there would be no mathematics, in the same way that there would be no football, tennis, chess, or any other set of rules with relational structures that we have contrived. Our contention that we have provided is that math was invented as a product of human intelligence and is unable to exist outside the human mind. Throughout this debate, my partner and I have continuously provided evidence for this contention, and it simply could not be invalidated. This debate has come down to a contention of animals in the wild, inventing or discovering math, which we have continuously provided evidence for and facts. I would just like to thank you all for coming out today.
All right, opponents ready? Audience ready? All right, my final focus begins now. All right, so for my final focus and summary, I would like to reiterate some of my own points and declare why they still stand. And finally, I'd like to go over and refute some of my opponent's points, and if time allows, I'd like to address kind of what happened during the questionnaire period. All right, so firstly, my opponents said that if the universe disappeared, mathematics wouldn't exist, much like a few different sports that they mentioned. Now, I'd like to say that if the universe disappeared, there wouldn't be anything. Okay, so, but like, since the universe is here, I think it's fair to say that mathematics is a universal language. We're seeing scientists, in this search for extraterrestrial individuals, they're using these mathematical equations in hopes to communicate with aliens. And if these, very intelligent scientists are using math to, hopefully get in touch with these aliens, then I think it is safe to say that it can be considered a universal language from what we know by ourselves right now. And also during the question period, there was many talks of a tiger and dividing food. And during that period, my opponents failed to differentiate between understanding a concept and inventing a concept. While they said that the tiger was inventing the concept of dividing among its own species, they really were talking about understanding and then teaching, because that's just what was happening right there. They said that the tigers, were inventing the idea of dividing these things, but really what they were saying was that the tigers were understanding how to do it. And they said that themselves. And the understanding, I would say, leans into more of the discovered. And to add on to this, we've talked about how a discovery doesn't mean that invention doesn't have to take place. Because as I've said before, mathematics has been all around us, but we've used it to really invent more complex ideas like rockets and bombs. We've used math to do all these things because math has been around us, and we've harnessed these equations. We've, discovered them, and they can be discovered by really, anyone. As I've said, in May of 2013, the mathematician Yitang Zhang introduced a study of prime numbers. Zhang of the University of New Hampshire, he showed for the first time that primes get increasingly rare within 70 million of each other. And then further scientists broke that down to 246. And this is further proof that math has existed and could have been discovered and solved before now. That existed for billions of years, and we just discovered it recently. Thank you.
We're going to take just like 5 minutes, let these debaters leave, and let the new round get ready to start. Shay has to go to baseball practice. Thank you for being here. I just stressed, 9th grade students, it's a very challenging debate topic. As you can see, complicated, philosophical, and abstract, and appreciate the way they took it on. So well done again, class.
I think we're about ready to start our second round. So before we get the rock, paper, scissors started to determine which team will go first, I'm just going to clarify the debate topic and the two positions that you're going to hear today. We'll start our second round, which will have the same format as our first round. So today's topic is NATO should increase its military response to Russian aggression in the Ukraine. The pro team, Piper Gilliam and Tommy Andres, is on my right. Con team is on my left, Amos Smithwick, Aidan Connell. Now, I would like one member from each team to come forward to play rock, paper, scissors directly in front of me. Okay, right here.
Okay, wait, I'm going to say it on.
So, rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
I'm doing chat of 3.
Let's one.
Let's go. Okay, winner. Pro team has won the rock, paper, scissors, and will choose to go second. So we'll hear first from the con team. Again, about 3 minutes for opening speeches, approximately, question and answer, and then the closing word.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for attending this event. So, my partner and I firmly oppose the resolve that NATO should increase its military response to Russian aggression in Ukraine based on the following two contentions. One, doing so would risk the credibility of the alliance and provoke division among current member states. And two, doing so would set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts involving non-NATO states. As the Collective Defense Article 5 of NATO's founding treaty reads, quote, "The parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all, and consequently, they agree that if such an armed attack occurs, each of them, in exercise of the right of individual or collective self-defense recognized by Article 51 of the Charter of the UN, will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith individually and in concert with the other parties such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area." Currently, Ukraine isn't a member state of NATO despite its best efforts to join the alliance. Article 5 is a hallmark of NATO, and operating under Article 5 when a non-member state is attacked would significantly harm the credibility of the alliance and set a dangerous precedent moving forward. Each of the 30 NATO member states is required to contribute financially to the alliance in order to implement its policy goals and fund military and defense operations. As of 2018, NATO common funded budgets and programs are funded by direct contributions and equate to only 0.3% of total Allied defense spending to run the entirety of the organization, its command and military infrastructure. It isn't fair, nor is it in the best interest of NATO to take funding from its members and use it to militarily intervene in a conflict that involves a nation not paying the same dues as a member state. While NATO has stated it won't militarily involve itself in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Ukraine has been the beneficiary of NATO imposing economic sanctions on Russia, and since Russia's illegal and illegitimate annexation of Crimea in 2014, NATO has helped to train, fund, and reform Ukraine's armed forces and defense institutions. NATO has contributed what it can to aid the people of Ukraine. However, using military forces is a bridge too far. Providing military assistance to Ukraine, a nation that isn't a member of NATO, would restrict NATO's ability to fulfill its primary purpose and put troops at risk that should only be used to aid member states. Conclusively, in providing NATO troops to assist Ukraine in its conflict with Russia, NATO will set a dangerous precedent moving forward for potential conflicts involving non-NATO nations. There have continued to be discussions regarding expanding NATO, including to countries such as Japan and India, nations that lie outside of North America and Europe, where the majority of NATO's current member states are located. Think about the situation involving Taiwan and China currently. It's quite similar to the situation that's currently taking place between Russia and Ukraine. Taiwan, much like Ukraine, is an independent country that China believes to be a, quote, runaway province. In 2021, Chinese President Xi Jinping noted that the historical task of the complete reunification of the motherland must be fulfilled and will definitely be fulfilled, peacefully or not, according to the market realist. If NATO decides to increase its military response in Ukraine, who's to say that Taiwan will soon be begging for NATO's help if China happens to militarily invade the independent country? The situation in Ukraine is very sad and heartbreaking, and NATO has offered to help through economic sanctions and through financially aiding Ukraine. However, an increased military response will be greatly detrimental for NATO. For these reasons, we strongly believe that NATO shouldn't, in fact, increase its military response to Russian aggression, as it will be to the detriment of the alliance and set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts not involving NATO member states. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Tommy Andres, and today my partner and I will be affirming the resolution that NATO should increase its military response toward Russian aggression. We make our argument today based on the two following contentions. One, Russia will not back down and will only increase their military efforts in order to achieve their goal. And two, NATO's increased military response does not necessarily mean sending NATO troops into battle, as there are alternative methods that can be executed without instigating a greater conflict. Since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, President Vladimir Putin has been trying to reestablish Russian dominance in a now Western-dominated world. Quote, in Russian eyes, the West has been the aggressor up until now, taking advantage of Russian weaknesses since the collapse of the Soviet Union, end quote. 5 NATO countries, the Baltics, Poland, Turkey, border Russia, a presence that threatens Putin but now puts those nations in danger with the current conflict escalating. NATO should prepare its military forces in case of an attack on any of these border states. Setting a response plan in place is a necessary responsibility of the alliance. Putin will not surrender. President Vladimir Putin said on March 16th that, quote, Russia would achieve its goals in Ukraine and would not submit to what he has called a Western attempt to achieve global dominance and dismember Russia, end quote. Putin also comes with an intense KGB background. Alexander Model, a professor of political science and a specialist on Russia, Ukraine, and the Soviet Union, put it, quote, this is a man who was committed to doing whatever was necessary to sustain Russia or a Soviet state, and he's still willing to do that, end quote. If the West thought that Russia would give up, If the West thought that Russia would give up, they don't know our history or our people, said Putin on the 21st day of the war. Putin himself has stated that he will not back down, and previous conflicts, such as the Second Chechen War, also demonstrate how far he will go. Professor Model claims that Putin is a man who is willing to go to the full length to achieve his political goals, even if that means genocide. With Russian aggression increasing and Putin's inability to surrender, an increased military response on NATO's behalf is no longer a question. It is a necessity. To avoid a greater international conflict, i.e. World War III or worse, nuclear warfare, several indirect methods of foreign aid can help extinguish the conflict without aggravating Russian forces. Ukraine's Air Force has been shown to, quote, deny Russian air superiority, end quote. This air domination subsequently renders Russia unable to conduct airstrikes and establish air bridges to resupply its forward ground forces. However, quote, Ukraine is taking substantial losses and is likely to run out of planes before it runs out of pilots. Accordingly, Ukraine needs additional air defense to maintain its aerial dominance, something NATO can most certainly assist with. Additionally, NATO can aid Ukraine with the training of civilians to use air portable systems. Weaponry is flowing into Ukraine from Western partners. However, Ukraine lacks sufficient personnel to operate such machinery. Having NATO members train Ukrainians to use these weapons will allow the nation to advance their offensive without wasting the resources. With NATO acting as an outsourced lifeline to this war, the alliance will help Ukraine, quote, avoid defeat, impose heavier costs on the Russian military to strengthen Kyiv's hand at the bargaining table, and allow time for sanctions to take effect, end quote. Among other potential indirect methods of military intervention with Russia, we find that preserving their military and aiding in other fields such as cyber attacks and the training of military personnel will help deter Russia from Ukrainian borders. Furthermore, we believe that there are few to no methods of stopping Putin diplomatically without surrendering the Ukraine. Therefore, NATO must increase its military response to the conflict to maintain the option for peace. Thank you.
Okay, great job. Audience members, we've now heard the main arguments. We're going into our question and answer period.
So the question was about whether there's any evidence to prove that Taiwan will need NATO's help if China were to invade. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So first off, I'd like to readdress our main contention about the fact that if NATO were to intervene militarily within Ukraine in the conflict involving Ukraine and Russia, that will set the precedent for future conflicts that involve non-NATO states. For example, Taiwan is not a part of NATO. So there is the potential that countries such as Taiwan will beg for NATO help in conflicts in the future, and thus NATO will have its hands tied, so to speak, in cases that involve non-NATO countries, which will include greater bloodshed and greater conflict moving forward.
I would really quickly just like to respond to the answer to the question. I think something important to highlight was that my opponent used the word the potential of Taiwan needing NATO's help. And another potential issue that comes up in this conflict is the potential for Russia to actually invade Poland or any of the other NATO border states to Russia, which would then need an immediate NATO response and actually would require it. So while there is the potential for other countries needing NATO's help or asking for it, there's a much more likely potential that a NATO state will actually get invaded very quickly and during this actual conflict, which is actually why NATO does need to increase its military response. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to respond to the response. Okay, so I'd like to remind us all what this debate is specifically about today. This debate is about increasing NATO military aggression in Ukraine, right? So our opponents have continued, by the way, which is just their speculation, that Russia at some point might attack a country that's in NATO, and then they try to make the link that to say that right now that means that we should increase our military response in Ukraine. However, this is nonsensical, right? We both agree that we want to avoid escalation at all costs. We want to avoid something like World War III happening, right? And so, again, if NATO were to use their troops and increase a military aggression in Ukraine, this would definitely lead to World War III, right? And so, again, Putin knows that if he goes so far as to attack a country like Poland, attack a country that's in NATO, that NATO is locked and loaded and that it is ready to go and it will fight back, right? So it's not the question of if he invades a neighboring NATO state, if we should fight back, because that's going to happen, right? And so it makes more sense to wait and see if he actually does that instead of relying on speculation and try to avoid escalation at all costs.
Okay, Tommy's not making moves, so we'll open it now to another question. And let's see, Anthony has one. Go ahead.
In school, we had learning about how Ukraine has requested a no-fly zone above their area so Russia can see some invasions of aerial and jet attacks. Is that, but Vladimir Putin has said that America granting Ukraine, all these other NATO countries granting Ukraine the ability to put a no-fly zone is considered intervening, and so he says that you can't do that or we will consider it an act of aggression from NATO. So my question is do you think that is considered aggression if Ukraine has requested just a no-fly zone above their place?
Okay.
Well done.
So basically, a no-fly zone is basically a designated area where no aircraft is allowed to enter because, it's a state of emergency right now in Ukraine because, they're being invaded. And basically, NATO would have to patrol the skies above Ukraine with thousands of flights and shoot down any Russian planes that violated the banned airspace, which, is an act of war. And if you can look back on, for example, the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the United States put in a line of battleships to prevent nuclear warheads from entering Cuba, that is an act of war because they were, deterring Russia from acting diplomatically with Cuba. And that's a very similar idea right now with the no-fly zone. So yes, that would technically be an act of aggression towards Russia from NATO.
Thank you. I'd just like to quickly add on to that, again, Ukrainian officials have called for this no-fly zone, and NATO has resisted, again, for the fear that this could draw member states into a full-fledged war with Russia and thus lead to greater conflict, which is what military intervention from NATO within this conflict would ensue. It would ensue greater bloodshed and more conflict and more lives lost. And has the spokesman for NATO has mentioned, quote, "We understand the desperation, but if we did that, we would end up with something that could lead to a full-fledged war in Europe involving much more countries and much more suffering. We will provide support, but we will not be part of the conflict." Therefore, this quote basically shows that intervening militarily within the conflict involving Ukraine and Russia would lead to greater bloodshed, and thus a no-fly zone is off the table in terms of offering support from NATO. Thank you.
Okay, final part to this question, hopefully, unless Amos decides to talk. But just to add on to what everyone said, we all would agree that a no-fly zone is not a good option for NATO, simply because Putin would interpret that as an act of war, and that is not what we want. However, an increased military response to Russian aggression in Ukraine, which is what this debate is on, does not necessarily mean inciting acts of war against Russia. For example, this could mean sending different planes or resources to Ukraine to actually help. So while a no-fly zone is not an option at the moment, there are a plethora of other options for NATO to pursue that would help Ukraine without instigating any other conflicts with Russia. Thank you. And Amos is going next.
Okay, so I actually would like to respond to that. And so I would like to say that the pro side is acting as if we haven't been helping Ukraine already, but many Western nations, including many of them in NATO, have actually been giving Ukraine a lot of aid. I mean, we've been giving them weapons. People have been going over to fight. I mean, like the United States has been sending a lot of things. There's been a lot of money. Additionally, there's been a lot of sanctions against Russia. I mean, we are doing pretty much everything we can short of directly using an act of war with our military to help Ukraine, right? I mean, we feel for Ukraine. We know that people are suffering over there, and we are trying to help the situation the best way we can. However, it's simply an unacceptable risk to take to increase military aggression and start World War III, right? And so, yes, I agree with you that we should provide aid, but NATO doesn't need to say that we should provide aid because we've already been doing that. So for that reason, that point is invalid.
Sure. So basically the question was about whether we see any situation in which NATO intervening militarily could occur, correct? Okay. So basically, we see if Russia does in fact move forth with invading NATO countries, then we do believe that military intervention is required due to Article 5 of NATO, which states that an attack on one should be seen as an attack on all, and thus all NATO countries are required to contribute and militarily intervene within that conflict. But currently, as Ukraine is not a member state of NATO, we don't see a military intervention as being successful or being necessary. Again, as Amos has mentioned and as I have mentioned in this debate, NATO is doing all it can within economic sanctions and other forms of aid to the people of Ukraine, short of military intervention, as we see military intervention due to a non-NATO member state would provide a greater potential for escalation and more bloodshed. Thank you.
I would just like to really quickly talk about the point on economic sanctions, which has been brought up a lot. The economic sanctions are actually extremely severe on the nation of Russia, but they're simply not enough. As Putin himself has stated, he will stop at nothing to achieve his goal, and he has recognized the pain that these sanctions are putting upon the people of his country, but he does not think that it is enough for him to stop pursuing his goal, which is why we must pursue further military response. We understand that NATO has been doing some things in terms of aid and in terms of sending weaponry, but there is more that they could be doing that would not be pushing Putin over the edge or instigating anything else. And that's what's really important, is that NATO has the room to do much more that would actually help this conflict, because as we've explained, there is almost no chance that Putin is going to back down. He has stated time and time again that he wants to get clear his objective no matter what, and he does not really care right now about the effect these sanctions are having on the people of Russia, which is why a military response is so necessary. Thank you.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
And I just would like to be as clear as possible. Like, these aren't just, ideas thrown around by, NATO, for example. There are plenty of solutions that we could still try. For example, we can train Ukrainian volunteers to use portable man systems. We can facilitate civilian cyber activities, and we can provide replacement fighter aircraft. So, going back to one of your questions about the no-fly zone, there are plenty of ways to go around a no-fly zone and not actually enact one. For example, providing replacement fighter aircrafts for Ukrainian soldiers. Like I said in my initial speech, I went over how about 10% of the NATO aircrafts right now have been destroyed and are decommissioned right now. And, so they have more pilots than they do aircrafts. And to maintain their air superiority, NATO can simply use, their cache of weaponry to, provide aircrafts to Ukraine and help them defend their skies and deter Russian military from crossing the borders.
Okay, so, all right, let's talk about the framing of the resolution of this debate, all right? So what we are debating today is increased military aggression. Now, I want everybody... Increased military response. So I want everybody to think about what that means. So does, providing Ukraine with more planes sound like a military response? Does training people how to use guns sound like a military response? I would argue that it's not. I would say that a military response would be a military action that NATO would take within the bounds of Ukraine that would be sending troops there. That is the definition of an increased military response. And furthermore, at the risk of repeating myself, I will once more say that it's not like we aren't doing anything. There's a lot of aid going to Ukraine. There's already a lot of, we're supplying them with a lot of things. And there's a reason that no one has done an increased military response because, once more, that will lead to a potential outbreak of World War III and cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lives unnecessarily.
All right, cool, perfect. We're going to stop the question and answer there. It's a great job. We're going to give you guys 1 minute, the debaters, 1 minute, before we go for our closing remarks. So 1 minute to talk and then closing speeches.
So I would like to begin this speech by simply reminding everyone that, as my partner brought up in his first speech, this is literally against the rules, right? I mean, according to Article 5 in the Constitution of NATO, NATO is a self-defense organization, right? So there is no feasible way to do this. But let's exit the realm of plausibility. Let's just assume for a second that we could do this if we wanted to. Here's why it's still fundamentally a terrible idea, right? So as I've said, NATO members are already giving a lot of aid to Ukraine and imposing sanctions on Russia, which directly contradicts our opponent's second point. I mean, it doesn't make sense to that NATO should, push their member countries to give aid to Ukraine. That's already happening. That is a non-issue. Their proposed solution does not even constitute an increase in a military response, which is what this debate is about. Our opponents said it themselves. They stand against something like a no-fly zone. They stand against something like that. They stand against escalation, and they don't want this to turn into World War III. However, if we respond with our military in Ukraine, that's exactly what it would do. So I would like to ask, what specifically would more troops in Ukraine, the sole topic of this debate, actually do? Our opponents make the case that Putin is bloodthirsty and will attack NATO members at some point, so we might as well escalate the entire situation right now. At the risk of repeating myself, I want to say that instead of relying on the pro-team's speculation, we must do all we can to avoid an outbreak of world war at all costs. NATO is ready to go if Putin invades a NATO state, but let's not preemptively start the greatest conflict of the entire 21st century. This completely breaks down their second and last remaining point. And again, let's talk about what kind of precedent this will set, right? Because if NATO is suddenly expected to respond to any conflict around the world that doesn't involve NATO states, that really doesn't bode well for the future of this alliance. Again, this is a self-defensive alliance that was formed among the countries to protect each other, not just get involved in any conflict that they want to. And yes, the situation in Ukraine is horrible, but we have to do some weighing. We have to weigh the mass destruction that is going on there right now with the future potential loss of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of unnecessarily lost lives on both sides if NATO were to intervene. There is a reason that every major NATO country has not increased their military operations within the bounds of Ukraine. Who should we side with here? These two high school debaters or the entirety of the NATO alliance? The prolongation of the war will pit NATO against Russia with the potential of introducing weapons of mass destruction, and in any case will be catastrophic and of unprecedented scale and must be avoided at any cost. And for this reason, our side still stands.
This microphone is so high. Okay. On my tiptoes. Okay. Throughout this debate, my partner and I have emphasized the need for a further military response from NATO. Our two main arguments were Russia, and more specifically its President Putin, will not back down from the conflict, and also that this increased NATO response does not need to include any extreme measures that will provoke Russia into fighting some sort of world war. We've effectively proved the plausibility of our claims, and there are a plethora of precedents to support each of our arguments. As we stated in our main speech, the case of the Second Chechen War, the Russians leveled the capital city, and this proves that Putin was willing to go to the full length to achieve his political goal. He destroyed this area in order to gain full control of the area, and he's willing to do the same thing with Ukraine. He himself has stated that he will not back down. Furthermore, there are many precedents that support NATO involvement in Ukraine. For example, providing the Ukrainian military with additional air defense to keep Russian forces from providing reinforcements to their troops and claiming dominance of the air. If we actually help, we can deter any further Russian aggression to the best of our ability. But for example, in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, all of the combatants ran out of aircraft but had many surviving qualified pilots. So, deliveries from the US and Warsaw Pact stocks kept their air forces optional until the war's end, and they helped out by offering resources, and this was able to actually end the conflict. A similar approach could be taken to help keep the Ukrainian Air Force flying, but this is just an example of further things that NATO could do that would help without actually fighting Russia. To move on, our opponent's contention surrounding Taiwan was purely speculation. We don't even know that this would happen for sure, but we do know that there are people dying in Ukraine right now. They also repeatedly say that the debate surrounds NATO's military aggression, but it's actually about a military response, as Mr. Nicholson clarified. And we recognize that NATO has done a few things to help Ukraine, but because of Putin's persistence, we cannot stop here. We cannot allow Ukraine to fend for itself, and because of this, NATO must increase its military response to Russia. Thank you.
Great, that was an amazing job. Great, well done, debaters. Amos, Aiden, Tommy, and Piper. Another round of applause. These are our 12th grade representatives, our debate team, and I think they just demonstrated how they've grown as debaters. Well done, thank you. You guys can return now to your seats, and we're going to move to our third and final round.
On my left is Ethan Dryden, and he demands a challenger, someone who thinks they would like a chance to debate. Now, to clarify, what we're going to do now is we're going to give a topic. He does not know the topic. And he will be, his opponent and Ethan will be given the topic at the same time. This is a debate that requires no research or knowledge of geopolitical situations, only the ability to make a logical case. So I'm wondering, is there someone in the room who would like the chance to participate in the next round? Looking for a hand raised. If not, I'm going to have to, okay, we've got someone. Come on up, Anthony. And big round of applause. Anthony Abetti. All right, so here's what's going to happen. Our debate is on what is better for swimming, a swimming pool or a lake. This is the topic. All right, each debater is going to have 1 minute to make their case for why they believe their position is correct. So, Anthony, because Ethan is an experienced high school debater and you are a brave challenger, I'm going to give you the option to choose which of these two topics you'd like to argue. Swimming pool or lake?
Lake.
Okay, you will take the lake. Ethan, that gives you swimming pool. Okay. All right? I'm also going to have Ethan speak first in this debate, and you will speak second. So you're going to have about 1 minute. You're going to make your case. Ethan's going to go. Then you'll have a minute to make your argument, and that will end the round. All right? And we can do a few of these very quickly. All right? So I invite Ethan Dryden to the podium. 1 minute. Swimming pool.
All right. Opponent ready?
Yes.
All right. Non-existent partners ready? Audience ready? All right. I will begin then. All right. So I would argue that swimming pools are better for swimming in. I would argue that this is because they are often kept clean, much cleaner than lakes usually are. They are kept clean with a variety of chemicals that maintain their cleanliness. As well, they offer a more conventional experience and they are easier to access than a lake. Lakes do not exist in all areas of the world, and anyone is capable of going to a store and buying a pool, which they can use to swim in, with a consideration of economical challenges, admittedly, but I would argue that still pools are much more easily available than lakes, and they are still much cleanlier. As well, I would argue that pools are often more sensationalized, and often when you think of being able to swim, you would often imagine a pool, you would often imagine being able to swim in the summer, and you often imagine these pool games that you play.
Thank you. And clap. Anthony and Betty, you may ascend to the podium. You have 1 minute to make your case and respond to your opponent's arguments. You may begin.
I would argue that a lake is better for swimming because, as you said, there are multiple chemicals in a pool, like chlorine and such. But these chemicals can also have non-beneficial to the body. For example, sometimes when you're swimming in a pool, you can drink a lot of water by accident, and chlorine is not the best drink for you. Also, I would argue that swimming in a lake, it's a lot more natural, and just like the idea of swimming with fish and around, even if it is dirty, just swimming around that area feels a lot more. A word I would use maybe is free, or around the forests and like just the natural area around it. Can I leave now?
I was mouthing, thank you. Thank you, great job. That concludes our first round of debate, and I know we have a spot for Anthony on the high school debate team as soon as he gets there. Clapping again, clapping again. You can return to your seat now. Thank you, well done. All right, who's next? Let's go, one more. I'm looking at you, Sam. Where's Sam? Let's go. The audience demands it, Sam. This is Piper's brother. All right, thank you for your participation.
Okay.
Of course, you're going to get to choose which topic, and you will also be the first. You'll get to speak second. Ethan, as the experienced debater, he'll go first. All right, here's our question. It's a better game, hide and seek or Monopoly? Which of these two games is a better game? This is a classic, right? Yeah. So, Sam, you get to choose which you'd like to argue for. Monopoly or hide and go seek?
Hide and seek.
All right. You've got Monopoly and you're the first speaker. All right, let's go.
Once again, I will ask opponent ready?
Yeah.
Non-existent partner ready? Well, audience ready?
Yes.
All right, I will begin then. I would argue that Monopoly is a far superior game to hide and seek. I would argue this because it has a very enriching style of gameplay. It has much more opportunities than hide and seek. It is very, I can't think of the word, sorry. But also it arguably teaches children economics and how to handle money, something that schools often do not teach, and strangely a children's game does. As well, it also teaches children about the justice system, as they can be sent to jail at a moment's notice. As well, Monopoly is a experience that will allow your family to bond together over a series of minutes, I meant to say, sorry, and possibly almost an hour of gameplay. It offers a very large span of time for which the family to spend together and have fun together. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ethan. Sam, you can step up to the podium. You'll have 1 minute, make your case for why hide and go seek is actually better than Monopoly.
Okay. I think hide and go seek is better because Monopoly, it breaks many families apart because you have to like pay your parents if you want to like take their property. Also, I don't think a single child would want to learn about economics ever until they're like 30. Hide and go seek is just better in every single way. You can hide in small places. Yeah.
Okay, well done. Thank you very much. Sam being a great sport and willing to get up here and join. Well done. Thank you, Sam. And return back to your seat. I think we can just one more, right? Maybe just one more. I'm looking. Aiden's. Huh? I know Piper would. Okay, come on, Piper.
Oh, yeah.
All right, I'm going to consult with
This is gonna go well for me, I'm sure.
After careful consideration, a topic has been selected. All right. Now, debaters, I'm going to give the advantage to Ethan in this round, as he took the disadvantage the last two rounds. So Ethan's going to choose, and you're going to go first. This is about being born into a family of siblings. Is it better to be the oldest? In other words, the firstborn child, the oldest, or is it better to be the youngest, the lastborn child? All right, to repeat, the debate is, it's better to be the oldest child in a family, or it's better to be the youngest child in a family of, obviously, more than one. Ethan, you have opportunity to choose position and speak second. What would you like to argue?
I will take the youngest child, not
Okay.
someone's youngest child.
Okay, good, thank you for that distinction. Ethan will argue it is best to be the youngest. Piper is going to argue it's best to be the eldest child in the family, and you're going to speak first. All right, so come on up. We'll take 1 minute speeches, and this will wrap up our debate event.
All right. I have a very personal experience with this topic, as I myself am the oldest child. You just saw my youngest sibling come up here and talk. But let's talk about what it is to be the oldest child. I know for a fact I am getting a larger inheritance than my brother is. Not only does the oldest child have more opportunities, such as I get to go to college, my parents are paying for it. I can't say the same for the rest of my siblings. However, there are some faults with being the oldest sibling, which I'm sure Ethan will bring up. But let's also be clear that the youngest sibling does have to face the majority of the neglect. They are the youngest. Their parents don't really care anymore. When you're the oldest, if you hit your head, you get rushed to the hospital. You're the youngest. If you fell out of a tree, your parent would say, okay. Moving on, if we're gonna talk about who gets more things, I mean, the oldest child gets the biggest room. They get the first car. They get the most things. They get the first experiences. They're the ones that have all of the photo books dedicated to their childhood. And for these reasons, the oldest sibling is by far superior.
Okay, Ethan, now it's your turn.
I'm just going to ignore the formalities of debate this time and hop right into it. So, I would argue that being the youngest child is better than being the eldest child. I would argue this because though my opponent brought up the fact that the younger child is more neglected, I would argue that as the youngest child in my family, I am loved far more than my oldest sister, as my mother, I'm sure, can attest to. As well, I would argue that even if that were to be true, that would offer the youngest child more freedom to explore and be themselves. And I think my opponent's point that if you're the youngest child and you fell out of a tree, I think you would still probably receive the proper medical treatment as a human being. As well, as a younger child, you have your older sibling to look out for you as well as your parents. So you have a larger network of people who are by your side and have your back to keep you safe and keep you healthy and to make sure you do well in school, so on and so forth. Thank you.
And
That was an outstanding round. I just wanted to say thank you for everybody who showed up here today to support the students. Thank you to the students for showing up on a Saturday to do debate. And thank you to the library, and Paige and Giselle, for hosting the event. Thank you for GNAT for being here and to record. We look forward to seeing that airing. And thank you again for coming. Have a great day.